What's up? This is Jared from Arkaik, and you're watching Richard Metal Fan.
So what's up, guys? Episode 170 of Richard Metal Fan Interviews, calling from Zoom, and I'm here with Jared Christanson of Archaic. How are you doing today, Jared?
Pretty good, Richard. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, and it's so awesome to have you here. So kind of like the format is, I want to do like a rundown of your discography and do like a history of your musical background. But to get back to young Jared, so kind of growing up, what were the first bands that got you into metal and what made you want to be a vocalist?
Some of the first bands that got me into metal were the Deftones, Korn, like the new metal stuff. I was into punk first, and then I met Chance, who's kind of the other founding member of Archaic, and we both started listening to a lot of like new metal, and then we discovered death metal, and so like Opeth and Decapitated, those kind of bands we got introduced to like in high school. Like so pretty young, we discovered all the death metal music, and uh that that's what we fell in love with, and that's what we wanted to make. And then we discovered like Spawn of Possession and all the unique leader bands, and kind of that was the trajectory for us.
Awesome, awesome. Because I feel like you have like the similar kind of like backstory as me. Because I grew up with the some of the pop punk stuff like Blink 182 and Green Day, Sum 41. But it was actually new metal was the first types of metal I've heard. Like I heard like Korn and Slipknot and Linkin Park bands like that. And I hate like a lot of the metal elitists would like talk shit about new metal, and I'm always like, so you're telling me that when you were like 5 years old, you were like walking to school with your lunchbox listening to In the Night Side Eclipse? Come on.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot
Yeah.
of us listened to that stuff. That was the only thing that was like super heavy and that we could get exposed to at a young age, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And kind of like talking about like some bands. What were like your bands before for first bands before you started up Archaic?
So funny enough, Archaic was my first band.
Oh,
I
and
started the
only
band
band?
in no, I played in another kind of side project when we had some like downtime in the early days of Archaic, and we were like looking for members to like, continue the Archaic stuff with. Chance and I, who was also in Archaic, started another band, and we had a few different names for it. It was like Odyssey and Exile, and then like Sleep Architect, or we had a few different names for the project. But I played drums in that, and I originally, I mean, with Archaic, I originally started playing on guitar. Like it was me and Chance playing guitar and kind of getting into guitar together. And then we wanted some people to jam with, and that's kind of how Archaic came about. But pretty much been my one main band since high school, which is going to be 20 years next year.
Yeah.
So the band started in 2004.
Wow, which is crazy. I was like 10 years old in 2004. But still, next year, almost 20 years of Archaic. Like, did you think that Archaic would be around for almost 20 years?
Not really. Uh yeah, I mean, when I first started playing music, I was really into it. I was like, I could do this for the rest of my life. Like, this is really fun. And just like collaborating and making music with other people, I really enjoyed. And then like performing. So it's not something that like I expected to last this long, but it also doesn't surprise me that I would be playing music like 20 years later.
Yeah. And sort of tell me about like that first EP, The Divine Manifestation, which came out in 2006. I love that EP. It's very raw sounding, like only just three songs like Deadlight, it's Divine Manifestation and To Observe Death from a Distance. I just love it. Where was that EP recorded at?
Uh, I I'm pretty sure that EP was recorded at a place in Riverside County, California called Love Juice Labs. It was like the uh we discovered this studio from another band who had a really good recording, and they were also from our area in Southern California. And we're like, oh, they recorded there with this guy, and his name was Metal Dan. And shout out Metal Dan. He kind of like uh really helped, like mentored us in the early years of like recording metal. And um he was like the engineer on that EP. But yeah, like that that was the first one that I really like tried to do a good job on vocals on, because we had always tried to find another vocalist. Like I was still playing guitar back then, and uh I kind of just wanted to play guitar, but we it was harder for us to find a vocalist than it was to find another guitar player. So I ended up doing the vocals on that EP because we had the music written, but we didn't have a vocalist or anybody to do the vocals. So I was kind of like messing around. We had a PA in our practice space, so I'd mess around with the mic and practice screaming and stuff. And Metal Dan kind of helped me and kind of coached me through the first kind of recording processes back in the day. But yeah, that was me and Chance mainly writing those songs, and um, some different early members of the band when we were still in high school.
Awesome. Some and then kind of like going into like the actual debut full length album, bleh, can't even talk. Existential Chaos. I like that. I think it has like that debut charm. What was the thought process going into the making the debut Archaic full length?
So that was our first attempt at like making a full album, and I think a lot of musicians always want to like make their album, right? Like especially back then, it was like we didn't even really call them EPs, we just called them demos. But we wanted to make an album and we had enough songs for an album. So we found a studio that had like a weekend deal, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. You could rent studio time as like a package, and they would print CDs at the end of your studio session. Like they would master it and print you CDs right there. So we signed up for that deal and recorded the album in a weekend. And I'm actually on drums on that album. That I think that's the only recording that I played drums on. But that was around the time where we also were looking for a vocalist, but we were also looking for a drummer and somebody that could play like more technical stuff. So I started playing drums, and I was like, surely we'll find a vocalist that they could scream, right? And then I'll just handle the drums and like practice a lot and try to get really good at death metal drums. And bought a drum set with like my graduation money and learned the drums. But you listen to that album and it's like it's clearly nowhere near like the drumming on the other album, like the albums that came later.
Yeah.
But yeah, we had enough songs for an album, so we just went in, recorded it in a weekend. Got some artwork from like an artist that we found online and put together that album. And it was just myself, Chance, and our bassist at the time, Eric Cohen, that was in the band. So we had three members when we recorded that, and um we just wanted to get something done and get an album, and that's what came out.
And I had no idea you played drums on that because it says on Metal Archives on Existential Chaos it was Keith Roylance that played the drums.
Oh yeah. Well, they need to update that if
Yeah,
anybody's on what is it called? Metal Encyclopedia?
it's Metal Archives or the
Metal Archives.
Metallum.
Yeah. No, it was actually me. Yep.
Yeah,
Um and then right after that we started to think, all right, well, let's just find somebody who's like years ahead of me on drums, so then we can really tighten up the foundation of like the songs. Um and we were trying to get signed to Unique Leader, and like all of the drums on all those albums were just like immaculate. So after that album, that's when we found Keith Roylance and Craig Peters, and those were
right.
kind of the band members that came into the band after that album, but brought us up a level to be like Unique Leader worthy.
Yeah. Yeah, and I swear, like Metal Archives is like turning into Wikipedia. They need to get their shit together.
Well, that's a really obscure album. I don't even really reference it that much or talk about it that much because looking back, I'm like, oh man, you know, compared to now, it was just kind of sloppy and all over the place, but it was a fun time. And there's like a secret song on that album too that's really hilarious that we recorded on the spot.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've listened to it. I need to re-listen to it to it at some point. Yeah, yeah, but I've also heard of like the like Loudwire when they do Wikipedia fact or fiction. We should do like the version for Metal Archives, try to like correct it to make it like 100% true.
There you go. Yeah, for metal, for the good of all metal.
Yes. And then then of course you eventually you got signed to Unique Leader Records. So how did they find Archaic?
Through a gentleman named Obi Flett, who sings for the band Inherit Disease. And we were playing a metal fest in LA, and we played we played that fest, and Unique Leader had a booth there. They were like selling CDs, and Obi was working the booth, and we I don't know, I forget how like he ended up seeing us. I think we were talking to him earlier in the day, and we were just like, hey, we really love Unique Leader, and all the bands, and we were just nerding out with him. And then told him when we were playing, he saw us play, and he kind of vouched for us to Eric Lindmark at the label and put in a good word and got the demo into the label. And yeah, that's kind of where it started. So from Obi in LA.
Yeah. And tell me about making Reflections Within Dissonance. Now you're signed to a label, but was there like pressure to follow up Existential Chaos, or did you just really wanted to take what you learned from that album to apply to this album?
Yeah, definitely the latter. We learned a lot from that album that we did kind of on our own, and we had another. That's when Keith came into the band, because we did a demo for Unique Leader. We did two demos for Unique Leader. One didn't pass the test, and basically we had to get a new drummer, and that was Keith, Roy Lance, who we got, and we re-recorded the songs, submitted a demo with Keith, and then and there were newer songs too, so they're like more technical. Like our songwriting was getting more like in the tech death style. And yeah, so some of the songs on that album on Reflections are on the Existential Chaos album, but they're like
More
improved
refined.
versions. Yeah.
Yeah. Like especially love like the intro, the transcend spiritual paths, which then I love the like the title track, which is I feel like it just every song just goes in with one another. Like the title track goes into to a paradigm. Like everything about it is just great. Hey, but great, especially like the last song, Face of Regression. It's a little bit of a slower track that kind of like speeds up halfway through. But I just kind of like there's like different kind of like vibes within every song on this album, but it still remains the heavy, fast brutality that Archaic is known for.
Thanks, man. Yeah, that was a big leap from the stuff that we had done before. And at the time, it was one of those times where, we were all still pretty young, like in our early 20s, and had a lot of like drive and passion. And we were practicing like twice a week and really trying to like put everything we have into those songs in that album to kind of like try to put ourselves on that level of like around the time like Severed Savior, Decrepit Birth, um, Odious Mortem, all these bands were like Spawn of Possession. They're just like blowing our minds. So that was kind of a smorgasbord of all those influences on that album.
Yeah, and then of course now you got signed to New Leader. Did you start like doing like big tours for when this album came out? Like, do you remember like the first tours that you did like in support of this album?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that album came out in 2010, and shortly, no, around the same time, we got our first tour, and that was with Brain Drill, Flesh Consumed, and Halo of Gunfire.
Wow.
And it was our first tour ever, so we didn't know any we didn't know what we were doing. And Brain Drill had like kind of had this big like moment on YouTube where, you know, they were like the Archspire of, but way back in the day, you know, they're doing just crazy sweeps, super fast songs, really intense. They just kind of took it to another level. And then they kind of had some downtime where like they weren't like releasing anything or they weren't touring. And then they that's I think I'm pretty sure that's Brain Drill's last tour they did. But I think we all expected the tour to be a little bit better than what it was. Um, so it was definitely like a good learning experience, and it was still fun, but um, it was one of those tours that was like you look back and you're like kind of laugh like um at just like how inexperienced we were, and um just some of the shows were like we played in a tiny little basement in Idaho, um a bunch of crazy like weird shows.
Yeah. Yeah, just like how random, like a random basement in Idaho.
Yeah, because a show got like shut down from another like black metal band, like broke the rules or something, so the promoter was like no more metal bands at this venue. And so we're
Oh,
like, okay, I guess we don't have a show. And then one of the guys that was like in one of the bands that we were opening for, he was like part of the scene, offered his like basement to have the show, and it was literally like the size of this room. It was like tiny.
oh shit, that's fucking crazy. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. It had to take one band to like fuck everything up for everybody.
yeah, yeah, of
Yeah,
course.
yeah.
But shortly after that, we did get a couple big, really big tours. So we did Black Dahlia Murder was our second tour.
Wow.
Um, and so it was just a big jump from like the first tour with Brain Drill, which is like really underground technical death metal tour, unique leader kind of tour. And then we got offered an opening slot. It was us opening, then Goat Horror and Black Dahlia. So three bands. It was like 2.5 weeks. And that was like our first exposure to like bands who were so well, you know, well oiled machines that it was like you know, just another day on the job for those guys. And definitely that was like one of the best learning experiences was touring with like Black Dahlia Murder, and um doing that tour early on kind of showed us what like exposed you're like you don't know how things are until you're like exposed to them. And
Yeah,
so we kind of got exposed to like a different level of like of the touring scene. And of course that helped us to now like be able to say that we toured with Black Dahlia Murder. And then the third tour we did was with Cannibal Corpse. So
wow. The
yeah, so
legends.
yeah, so we thought Black Dahlia was awesome, and it was. And then we went for another awesome tour, which was much longer. It was like a full 6 weeks because we had to drive to the East Coast to start the tour. And then we had to do a full lap around the US back to the East Coast. And then we had to drive all the way back to the West Coast.
Yeah,
So it was a long, there was the longest tour that we had done at the time. And of course, all the shows were amazing. Like, you know, sold out or close to sold out, and um, just a perfect crowd to play to as a young death metal band.
yeah. Yeah, and then kind of we'll talk about going into the next album, Metamorphignition. I love this album. I think this is pretty much the album that got me into Archaic. So, well, what was it like going from this to this? And hard to believe last year was, of course, the 10-year anniversary of this. So, how do you feel about this now, pretty much now 11 years later?
Yeah, that's I think up until our most recent album, that was like the album that I think had the most, I don't know, it's like definitely a fan favorite, and the songs are just really well done. We had a really core unit with like Craig and Ivan, who came into the band during that Black Dahlia tour, he was in Brain Drill on that first tour.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you also have Alex Ben on the drums now, currently killing it with Trivium. So, what was that like working with him?
Yeah, it was cool. Alex is awesome, and he, I think he was like at the time not sure if he was going to play metal anymore. He was thinking about doing like some more like fill in, like the high levels, like fill in gigs, or like session player for like the pop and hip hop kind of. He's a super well-rounded drummer. And he had a lot of friends just kind of going that route, but we found him on YouTube doing a Guitar Center drum off thing, and he threw some blast beats in. And so we like figured out that he's from Northern California and we were in Southern California at the time. So we hit him up, and we were able to talk him into joining the band and recording that album. So like he came into the band like pretty close to when we released that album. Like we had pretty much everything written, and we needed a drummer, and we found Alex, and he came in, recorded that album in Oakland and killed it. And kind of also like his drumming took our music to another level, as you can
Yeah.
see that has happened with Trivium too, because
Yeah.
Alex is just a gangsta.
Yeah, he's a fucking beast. Like he's a fucking beast, Jared. What can we say? We can't
Yeah.
yeah, we can agree on that. Yeah,
Yeah,
but
so
yeah.
um 10 years later it still sounds good, like the mix and stuff. We had Zach Oren do that album, and the um the two that came after that. And yeah, it was just a time in the band where we were even more like focused and kind of pouring our talents together than the reflections.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love how you pretty much had divided into like three chapters, like tapacis tapacitic exodus, sirens and electric veils, and path of recognition. Is this couldn't pretty much feel like almost like a concept album, and sort of like what inspired this?
Yeah, so it it definitely is a concept album. We had done reflections, and that was just like a collection of like topics that we liked writing about. Um, and Chance has for a long time was like our primary lyric writer, and I would kind of like apply the lyrics to the songs, and sometimes I'll like rearrange things, but he's always had a way with words, and he was inspired by a book. What's it called? I have it right here. Oh yeah, yeah. He was reading this book called Imagica by Clive Barker, and
Wow.
it's like obviously a pretty gnarly book. Um,
Yeah.
but he was inspired by this book, and it's kind of like about out of body experiences, and just all sorts of crazy concepts. And Chance wrote the lyrics and the whole like breakdown with like the chapters, and what you were just referring to. He had written it pretty like stream of consciousness, and so he just like just put it all out onto it like a Google Doc. And then yeah, we just applied those lyrics to the songs and kind of picked the order, and um made it a concept album. And then we've been carrying on that story with every album after it, basically.
Yeah, and it's just like it just flows through really well, especially like lyrically. It's just great. It feels like every song just pretty much goes like really cohesive.
Thanks, man. Yeah, that's what we were trying to go for. And we were also listening to a lot of Mars Volta back then, and they have like weird intros in between songs, and it kind of just, you can let the whole record play and kind of trip out in between each song, and then like next thing you know, the song starts. And yeah, so we are kind of going for that vibe too.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's good to like have like those have some interludes to just give the listener a chance to like breathe before the chaos continues.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, and then then next up is Lucid Dawn. I like this album. So what was the thought process going into making this album?
So that was kind of when we reformed or had like a new version of the band in some ways. We still had Alex and Ivan, but Craig Peters had left the band after that Cannibal tour. We did one tour with Severed Savior, and then him and Chance left at the same time. And Craig just wasn't really in love with touring all the time, and kind of it was wearing him down financially because we make nothing, or we definitely made nothing, on those first few tours. And then Chance was really getting into electronic music, so he was like wanting to do more electronic music and kind of still stay involved in the band, but not as a guitar player. So we found Greg Paulson and Miguel Esparza. So Alex was in a band with Miguel. So Miguel wrote like half of the riffs on that album, and Greg wrote like half of the riffs on Lucid Dawn.
Yeah. I'm trying to know which ones he did. There was like I'm trying to know which songs that he wrote on because all like I could definitely tell like who does what, but it still sounds killer.
Yeah, we tried to weave it together enough to where you couldn't really notice a huge difference between songs, and it I always try to put the album together to make it sound cohesive. That's kind of one of my roles is like creating the track listing and kind of what song should flow into the next. So that in that album, it was also where I became kind of like the driving force in the band, because Chance being the only other original member and founding member, and him leaving, it was like, okay, like if I want this band to continue, then I have to like step into that role of like band leader and motivate people to get things done, and like all the other not fun stuff that comes with being a band.
Yeah.
And yeah, so and I started writing more lyrics on that album too. So I definitely like that was the first album where I really went a lot deeper into writing lyrics and kind of co-writing the lyrics with Chance.
Yeah. And then kind of going into the next album, Nemethia. Yeah, yeah, I like that album. Tell me about the making of that album.
Yeah, that one was our so that was like our fourth Unique Leader album, and that one was at another time where let's see, the primary songwriter on that album was Greg Paulson. Me and him got a house together. We were living together and like working on music all the time. And so like I wrote the drums, like even on Lucid Dawn, a lot of like the core, like Alex obviously pimped it out and made it like way sicker on all the fills and stuff. But a lot of that stuff was like me writing the drums, and especially with Nemethia, Greg writing the guitar parts. And we made that at a time where we had a house together and we were like working on music all the time. And it was a lot to put together. With it felt like just two of us, because Alex had started to that was right around the time when he started to play with Trivium. He was supposed to record the album, but he got a touring opportunity with Trivium when we had like studio dates set. So that Gabe Sieber actually played drums on Nemethia,
Yeah.
because Alex wasn't available to do it. Um, so yeah, that one's a really heady album. Like the songwriting, and there's a lot of like layers to it that are very. There's a lot of nuance to that particular album. It's very like technical.
Yeah. Yeah, and like that whole album is great. Like going into a cultivation, shouldn't even like some of the two instrumentals, Dweller of the Threshold is great, and even like the little, I guess you could call it the interlude, Lifting Amnesia, which goes into Telegnosis, I think, is a really great. Like everything about that album is just perfect.
Thanks, man. Yeah,
Yeah,
the flute on that one, shout out to Dallas Brown. He's one of our buddies we met through like the metal world, who has been around the metal scene a lot longer than us and kind of a mentor. And he is also like a really, really talented flute player. And he's got like a ton of these exotic, like native flutes and flutes from all around the world. So he used like three different flutes on that Dweller on the Threshold, like interlude.
yeah, yeah. And like who knew you would hear flutes in a death metal song?
Yeah, and that was just the interlude. Like we definitely made it a point to have Dallas more of a try to blend his flute in with the actual song and like with some heavy riffs, which is what he did on our newest album, Labyrinth the Hungry Ghosts.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I still think that flute is good. It kind of like a foreshadowing, like the experimentation, because I know no Rivers of Nile, they have had like a saxophone player player. So if they so you're kind of like doing experimenting before they did.
Yeah, I don't know, man. It just felt like what fell together organically, and I'm sure it probably did for these other bands too. Like if you know, but somebody who's really good at sax and they also understand like what you're trying to do, like it might happen, organically or not like so intentionally. But we've always had that kind of mystical vibe or like mystical concepts and stuff. So it was just kind of a natural thing to have him like, oh, we got to put some flute medicine like in the death metal, brah. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But I also know before the latest album, I know in 2019 you dropped the song Supernal Flame. I thought that was a pretty good song. Was that sort of like the initial vision before you started making Labyrinth of Hungry Ghosts?
Um, yeah. So it could very well have been a song on Labyrinth, but basically we had like a few songs that were in the works, and that one was the closest to done. And it was like the first one we got done when we started writing with like Chris Portugal and Alex Haddad. Um, and it was in between Nemethia. So Nemethia came out 2017, and then we realized we weren't going to have an album out for at least like 3 years or something. So we wanted to release some new music with some of the new players that we had, and we just chose a song to finish up and to put out as a single and just see how it goes, kind of test the waters with like a single, and as a way also to not like have a big huge block of time where we're not releasing anything.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course you got signed to a new label. You're on the Artisan era. Bro, what was that like working with them on the album?
It was great. The single Supernal Flame was also a kind of a statement for like where we're going as far as like our label and stuff like that, because that single was released on the Artisan era. So we used that single as a way to announce the new label, and they're awesome to work with. You may know Malcolm or Mike. They're the guitar players for Infury.
Yeah, I've interviewed Malcolm.
Cool. Yeah. I've known Malcolm for a while just because he's been in the metal and death metal scene for a while, playing in different bands. We met a long time ago, and he's always liked Arkaik and thought that we deserve like a platform. And he's always wanted for us to kind of like succeed as a band. And so that's kind of part of the reason that he signed us. And also our deal with Unique Leader was up, so we could, make that transition. So yeah, that's what we did. And Malcolm and Mike, they're really good at like shooting music videos now. So like the two music videos that we put out was just Malcolm and Mike. like together, working together and filming and doing all the lighting and everything. And so it was cool to have them like care about the content side of the album and kind of the promotional side and making music videos and lyric videos and stuff. So we definitely put a lot, and we did like studio playthroughs. So we put out a lot of like supporting content for Labyrinth, thanks to like working with unique or working with the Artisan Era, because they we flew out to Nashville and like filmed a bunch of stuff.
Yeah. And with Labyrinth of Hungry Ghosts, did you want to like continue in the same vein as Nemethia, or do you think you wanted to make try something new with the new album?
Yeah, so I realized I definitely realized in realizing it more and more how like certain songs really just like hit live, and some and like certain songs don't. Like when you perform them, like the energy that the crowd kind of gives back to you, and like the crowd reaction, and just their ability to get into it. And like a lot of technical death metal um is kind of like a riff salad, and it doesn't have too much structure to it, or like I don't know, it just feels like hard to follow along to as a song. And with Labyrinth, I wanted to try to write better songs. And so I like definitely played a big role in like the arrangement of the songs, and taking the riffs that Chris and Alex were making, and um you know, thinking about where the vocals going to go, where are they not going to go, like more of that kind of stuff. So yeah, kind of also like the guitar player, like every guitar player has a different style too. So that like plays a role in it, in
Yeah,
what
and
kind of riffs we're working with.
yeah, and I've been listening to the album many times, and I find it like addictive in many ways because I see you also have a lot of like technical parts and also a little bit of like genty parts that fit well with sort of like the concept of pretty much like your guys' entire discography. So, different is the album for you in terms of like the guttural things? Did you like add any improvements with like new techniques and methods compared to like previous albums? And do you think you want to try to like put in some like different new ideas to the next album?
Yeah, so the Labyrinth of Hungry Ghosts album I recorded here at home with this mic and this little Focusrite interface. And I worked like I had more time to work on it. Like I was not trying to rush the process, and kind of like make all the demo tracks, get them to like a place that I'm happy with as a demo. Um, and I was also definitely trying to go make my lows lower and make my highs higher, and also do more like mid range that kind of like harmonizes in a way with the riff. um so also what I did more on that one was like I learned that like if you record like a center track and a left and a right track, and you pan like the left and the right just a little bit, you know, left and right, you get it. It really makes the like chorus parts, or like the parts that you want really like to pop or pronunciate, like sound bigger. So you kind of get this 3D effect. So I was doing that a lot. I did that a lot more, and made it like intentionally did that on the new album. And because like knowing that we could pull it off live, because usually we have like one, at least one, a lot of the times two backing vocalists. So I was like, well, I want to get that triple vocal feel on this album. And then I want to do my best to pull that off live. So it kind of sounds really big on the parts that I want it to sound big on.
All right, so you basically wanted to like capture sort of like the live elements meant on the CD. Like, is there like a similar energy to like playing live as to on CD, or they're almost kind of like completely different?
As far as like recording and making the record and doing those recordings versus performance performances and playing live,
Yeah.
yeah, they're almost polar opposite. Because like when you're recording, you can stop if you want to. You can walk away for 5 minutes. You can like um take and do the part over and over again until you get it perfect. There's nobody watching you usually, or at least for me, I was just hitting spacebar, doing the part, just recording myself. And yeah, so it's a more like intimate, like personal kind of experience. Whereas like the performances are more of like, you're trying to entertain in a way and like bring the songs to life the best you can, for people to like experience live. So they're definitely, to me, feel a lot different.
Right. And one thing to note is I also love like your lyrics. I know lyrically you talk about like the thoughts and creation. When it comes to like making lyrics, do you have to like put yourself in that sort of like mind frame to come up with lyrics, or does it come from like your own kind of like own personal experience?
Um, a little of both. It definitely comes from my personal experience and like what's currently going on in my head and like what I'm into, like conceptually and stuff like that. So like every album, it's kind of like I'm at a different phase in my life where like I have different, interests, or like, especially when it comes to like the kind of stuff that we talk about in our lyrics. But I'm also coming from the perspective of a singular sort of like character and what's going on in that character's mind. So like the character's name is Cyrix, and it's kind of this off or this parallel universe type um story. So it's kind of coming from a perspective of like a fictitious character, but also like just coming through like my natural like filters of like what's exciting me or what I'm into at the moment.
Awesome. And also, since Labyrinth of Hungry Ghosts has been out for a little over a year now, have you started like ideas for the next Archaic album? So what's the status with that, if you're allowed to say?
Yeah, I've started with like some outlines of ideas and some concepts, and I have um like a place where I keep those in like a Notion document. And so I kind of have a rough idea of where it's going. And as far as the music goes, something, I don't know, something's telling me that I want to like try to do my best to make the technical, groovy, brutal death metal more experimental, or try to incorporate sounds and do things different than like the standard, or kind of, I feel like sometimes you can kind of play it safe and like make the quality technical death metal, like that's what we've always done, is kind of make the um what we can do, like our best version of it. But I also feel like people are thirsty for something different, so I'm kind of right now trying to figure out what is that for this band.
Awesome. So before we go, Jared, I just want to thank you for this interview. It's great to be able to talk with you today. Is there just anything else with the Archaic you would like to plug in terms of like tours and any of that good stuff?
um yeah, not really any tours that I can announce right now. I do have something coming up to announce, but can't say anything just yet. It's still like, I think it just started being booked. So whenever that's okay to announce, I'll announce it. Um, but yeah, you can follow us on Instagram, Archaic Official, and you can go to our website, archaicband.com, and check out some of the merch we've got there. And you can join our like private Facebook group. And yeah, that's about it.
Awesome. So everybody, dude, Jared from Archaic. We'll see you next time.